Imagine a city so perfectly preserved that its streets still curve toward a harbor long vanished, yet no voice remains to tell its story. There is a place where time did not erode history, but froze it under a silent gray tomb of volcanic ash. On the Greek island of Santorini, beneath layers of pumice and ancient despair, lies a mystery that challenges our understanding of collapse. They call it the Minoan Pompeii, but the name alone fails to capture the profound emptiness that haunts this excavated world. As you gaze upon the multi-story houses and vibrant frescoes, an unsettling truth creeps into the mind. Everyone simply left. Unlike the Roman city of Pompeii, where bodies are forever trapped in their final agony, Akrotiri offers no human remains. The city is a ghost in architectural form, a labyrinth of walls and windows that stare out at us from a catastrophe that consumed an entire era. The Great Theron Eruption, arguably the most violent geological event of the ancient human world, shattered the island's heart around 1600 years before Christ. Yet, in the decades since its discovery, archaeologists have unearthed a place not of entombment, but of eerie, methodical abandonment. How did a thriving Bronze Age metropolis, at the height of Minoan power, vanish without leaving behind a single skeleton to mark its final hours? The ash that buried Akrotiri preserved not just buildings, but the very breath of a civilization that seemed to evaporate into the sea. It is a historical paradox, evidence of an advanced society confronting a natural apocalypse, yet leaving behind only empty beds and neatly stored pottery. We tell ourselves that time reveals all things, but as you stand at the edge of this excavation, you realize some silences only grow louder. The search for answers begins at the threshold of a civilization that mastered the waves, only to be swallowed by the earth. Our journey into this forgotten city starts not with a scream, but with a whisper of pumice falling softly onto deserted rooftops. The story of Akrotiri, as we know it, began in the mid-20th century when Greek archaeologist Spyridon Marinatos was drawn to the volcanic soil of Thera. He was not hunting for a lost city. He was tracing the roots of a legend, the story of a vanished people whispered through the works of Plato. Marinatos dug into the ashen drifts, and the island slowly surrendered its secret, revealing a Bronze Age settlement of staggering sophistication. Streets aligned with geometric precision emerged from the gray grave, their drainage systems still capable of carrying water after 3.5 millennia. The buildings rose 3 and 4 stories high, their facades adorned with windows framing nothing but the darkness of a prehistoric sky. Within these structures, the ash had molded itself around furniture, leaving hollow impressions where wooden beds and tables had long since turned to dust. The artistry clinging to the walls was not primitive. It was breathtaking, alive with motion and the ghostly palette of a world that loved color. A fresco of blue monkeys leaping through a rocky landscape defies our assumptions about the reach of ancient mariners and their connection to distant lands. In another room, 2 young boxers face each other, their braided hair and precise posture capturing a moment of ritualized violence frozen forever. A fleet of ornately detailed ships sails across a plaster sea, each vessel a testament to a maritime empire that once connected Crete to the wider Mediterranean. You walk through these rooms as a time-traveling intruder, aware that the ships on the wall sailed long before the ash fell. The level of preservation is so intense that you can almost smell the saffron in the fresco of the flower-gathering women, almost hear the silence after the first quake. And that is the core of the enigma. The city was not caught by surprise in the dead of night, but was emptied long before the final catastrophic blast. The volcanic process on Thera was not a sudden, Vesuvius-like explosion that trapped a populace unawares. Geological evidence suggests a sequence of violent precursor earthquakes and an initial lighter rain of pumice that served as a deadly warning. It seems the inhabitants of Akrotiri read the trembling earth and decided to flee their jeweled city by the sea. They gathered their most precious belongings, their tools, and their families, leaving behind only large amphorae and the heavy infrastructure of their daily lives. The empty streets, a stark contrast to the eventual pyroclastic inferno, tell a tale of a refugee crisis that we can only guess at from the silent stones. Where did they go? This single question transforms the site from an archaeological treasure into an existential cipher. The logical answer is the sea, their great highway. Yet the Mediterranean around this shattered island holds its own secrets. The eruption generated massive tsunamis that raced outward, slamming into the northern coast of Crete with the force of a collapsing mountain. Did the men, women, and children of Akrotiri push out into the caldera on fragile boats, only to be swallowed by a liquid wall of ash and water? If so, the bones of an entire city now rest in the deep abyss beyond the caldera cliffs, dissolved by the sea that was their only escape route. The soil beneath the ash offers no answer, only the chilling absence of hoards of precious metal, suggesting the survivors fled with their wealth to an uncertain fate. Where archaeology falters, speculation, and the labyrinth of theory begin to weave their own fragile threads of narrative. Some researchers argue that the evacuation was a masterful success, a complete relocation to nearby islands, or the Minoan heartland of Crete. They point to the lack of bodies as proof that the Minoan early warning system, perhaps based on seismic activity, was flawless. Yet, if tens of thousands survived, why did the metropolis never rise again? Why did they not return to dig out their homes from the soft pumice? A darker hypothesis suggests that the eruption did not just destroy a city, but fatally crippled the Minoan psyche, ending their world in a spiritual sense. The ash that blanketed Crete may have triggered crop failures and famine, turning the survivors into desperate migrants who were eventually absorbed and forgotten. Their art, their writing, their identity would have dissolved within a generation, swallowed by the very disaster they physically survived. Then there is the ghost of Atlantis, forever circling this sunken caldera like a phantom of a lost empire. The Minoans, with their bulls, their maritime dominance, and their sudden collapse under a volcanic cataclysm, fit the archetypal template too neatly to dismiss. The truth is that Akrotiri may be the world's most heartbreakingly complete fragment of a story whose final chapters burned in the stratospheric dust. The frescoes do not tell us where the people sailed, only that they lived with a vibrancy that makes their disappearance all the more arresting. We are left staring at a jar of fossilized snails found in a kitchen, the last meal never eaten, a mundane relic that defies our hunger for a final act. The archaeological record refuses to cooperate with easy storytelling. It offers only the terrifying efficiency of a city that scrubbed itself clean of life. Logic demands a rational reconstruction, but the dust of Thera mocks the limits of our forensic imagination. As you trace the footprint of a fleeing inhabitant, preserved in the mud of a prehistoric rainstorm that fell before the apocalypse, the distance between then and now collapses. The human obsession with Akrotiri is driven by our deep need to understand endings, to see ourselves in the refracted terror of a collapsing world. Archaeologists have spent decades in the silence of this walled city, brushing away the gray veil, yet the emptiness often takes a psychological toll. To uncover room after room of exquisite beauty, prepared for a party that never came, is to feel the weight of a civilization's interrupted heartbeat. There is a maddening intimacy in the ruins, a pair of ritual horns resting on a stone bench, a carbonized basket of seeds, a windowsill worn smooth by ancient hands. Spyridon Marinatos himself died at the site in 1974, consumed by the very excavation that defined his life, buried not by ash, but by the ground that claimed his obsession. His life echoes the fate of those he sought, a profound dedication to a city that, in the end, keeps its deepest wisdom locked within the volcanic tuff. We often believe that uncovering the past brings clarity, but Akrotiri creates only a sharper, more poignant fog of uncertainty. The more we learn about their advanced architecture and globalized trade, the more we realize how fragile our own bridges to the future truly are. A tremor, a cloud of ash, a wave in the distance, the sequence of events is a clockwork mechanism that erases centuries of progress in a single afternoon. The sand of the ancient hourglass ran out not just for them, but for an entire mythological era that we are still trying to decrypt. Consider the human mind that stood on a hill overlooking this blighted city as the pumice piled high on the roofs. Did they weep, or were they too terrified to breathe? The evacuation of Akrotiri is perhaps the most dramatic success story of disaster response in antiquity, or the most tragic failure, depending on what the sea swallowed. We seek a definitive answer, life or death, but the universe offers only the gray static of volcanic dust settling on an empty bed. The obsession has spread beyond archaeology into the realm of comparative myth, where Akrotiri is the physical echo of a collective Bronze Age trauma. These ruins are a silent witness to a force that humanity cannot negotiate with, a mountain reforming itself into a sky-darkening column of gas and rock. Standing within the modern bioclimatic roof that protects the site, you are suspended between the ancient catastrophe and the glassy future of our own civilization. The multi-story facades stare down at you like petrified giants, their shadows moving only with the slow arc of the sun, a clock that has ticked for 3,600 years. What makes us stare so long into the void of this abyss is not the grandeur of the Minoans, but our own proximity to invisible, geological disaster. We possess satellites and seismic sensors, yet the deep terror of the unanticipated still grips our collective throat when the earth shakes without warning. Akrotiri is a mirror held up to our own cities, asking whether our warnings would be heeded, or if our escape routes would turn into traps. The fresco of the papyrus flowers, so delicate it seems to sway in an imaginary breeze, reminds you that beauty is not a shield. It is a target. The Minoans sculpted their world from stone and pigment, believing in a cyclical rhythm of nature, until nature composed a final devastating visual poem of fire. The ash that destroyed them is the very substance that preserved their legacy for our disbelieving eyes. This chemical paradox, where destruction becomes curation, is the cruelest gift of the Thera volcano to modern mankind. As the labyrinth of history closes in, you realize you are not solving a crime against humanity, but witnessing a natural law. Entropy can be paused, but never reversed. The wall paintings laugh and dance in the museum lights, frozen in a moment of joy, while the city itself remains a tomb without bodies, a book without an ending. Where are they now? The question reverberates through the caldera, the invisible heart of the eruption that turned an island into a crescent of black cliffs. The sea that took them, is the same sea that carried their treasures across the known world, a blue abyss that gives and takes without explanation. There is a profound, lingering silence that settles in the soul after spending time with the relics of Akrotiri, a recognition of our own impermanence. We are drawn to mysteries because we hope to find a loophole in the finality of things, a proof that a civilization can vanish, yet still speak. But perhaps the eternal lesson of the Minoan Pompeii is that history is not a narrative with a moral, but a series of stark, indifferent geological events. The stars that wheeled above the empty city on the night after the eruption are the same stars that will one day gaze down upon the ruins of our own forgotten towers. The clockwork of the planet grinds on, and the sand that once covered Thera now acts as the soil where tourists snap pictures, oblivious to the groan of the magma beneath. We cannot condemn the Minoans for failing to return. They were not running from a problem, but from the end of their world as they knew it. The fog of time obscures their fate, placing them in a liminal space between myth and death, a ghost fleet sailing forever beyond the horizon of recorded memory. In the end, Akrotiri is not about a lost city. It is about the paradoxical gap between what we can touch and what we can ever truly know. We hold a stone cup from 3,600 years ago, and the warmth of the hand that last held it is the only thing that remains missing. That missing warmth is the eternal fade, the space where human ego confronts the chilling vastness of geological time. As you look upon the shattered walls and empty streets, you understand that history is not written by the victors alone, but by the silent layers of ash that seal the losers in perfect clarity. So the enigma endures, not as a question for archaeologists, but as a meditation for all of us who build our lives on the slopes of sleeping mountains. Every civilization is just one seismic heartbeat away from becoming a ghost story, whispered by a future we will never see. And in that silent, ashen street, under the Mediterranean sun, you realize the most haunting sound is not a scream from the past, but the absolute silence of a vanished crowd awaiting a return that never came.